So good evening, everyone. Can you hear me all right, by the way? I'm not totally confident in my college Wi-Fi. Thank you so much for joining our event today on the 20th Party Congress of the China Communist Party. We're framing this event as a retrospective take on the Congress, which finished almost exactly a month ago. And while I'm sure most of the audience are already familiar with the main takeaways from the conference and who the dramatis personae of the CCP's next 5 years will be, we shall be trying to unpack the long-term political and legal trends which the Congress has signaled. I'm going to just give a brief word on our society, the Cambridge University China Forum, for those who are joining us for the first time, which I think is actually most of the people in the audience. We are a student society based at University of Cambridge, committed to facilitating constructive conversations about China with diplomats, journalists, academics, and anyone with experience in the field, really. Our conversation today will be principally between Professor William Hurst and Dr. Ling, who will go over some of the crucial institutional implications of the events that took place over the duration of the Congress and the composition of the final standing committee of the Politburo. We shall aim to split the event into 40 minutes for our guest dialogue and 20 minutes for the Q&A. So do get your questions ready for them, because we'll be calling on you. Professor Hurst has been the Zhonghua Professor of Chinese Development in the University of Cambridge since January 2021. And he's one of the fellows associated with the Cambridge Center for Geopolitics, with whom we are very glad to be hosting this event. He works on labor politics, contentious politics, political economy, and the politics of law and legal institutions, principally in China and Indonesia. And joining us from the University of Vienna, we will also be drawing upon the insights of Dr. Ling, who teaches Chinese politics and law. She has recently penned some fascinating articles on the institutions that govern the Communist Party and the Party Congress, including a cover story for the Diplomat entitled How the Party Congress Actually Works, and a more recent one on the implications for CCP norms of the 20th Party Congress, which I encourage you guys to go and read. And without further ado, I will turn it over to Professor Hurst, who will be moderating this event. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for organizing and co-hosting this event. As mentioned, it is co-sponsored by the Center for Geopolitics here at Cambridge, so please do engage with us as well. To the extent that you're interested, we have many events online and in person about China and other topics. And so here we are now, almost a month after the conclusion of the 20th Party Congress, and it seems a good time to kind of take stock of what's happened and what it may mean for future trajectories of political change, institutional reform, and other aspects of Chinese politics. And so I'm really excited today to meet online Professor Li, whose work I've admired and been a fan of for many years, but whom I've not yet had a chance to speak with. She's a particular expert on Chinese law and politics, and especially actually the discipline and inspection system, but all aspects really of law and politics. And so she may speak a lot about sort of the rules and structures of the organization of the CCP and how they're affected, or actually she can talk about anything she wants. So I'd like to turn the floor over to her to speak essentially as much as she'd like about whichever aspects of this she finds most interesting, and then I'll come back in with some points in response before we go into more dialogue and discussion. So please go ahead.
Okay, thank you for organizing the event, and thank you for Professor Hurst to agree to moderate the event, whose work I've been reading all these years and have never had a chance to see face to face. So I appreciate the opportunity very much and very much look forward to this dialogue with Professor Hurst. So I don't have a prepared script for this conversation, so I hope to draw some spontaneous thinking and be challenged by Professor Hurst and the rest of the audience on some of the ideas I'm trying to develop from my observation of the 20th Party Congress. But first of all, let me just throw out some caveat. I'm not an expert or specialist of elite politics of China. So I came from a law background. I only started to look at the institutional aspects of the party when I was doing research on the CCDI, the Central Commission of Discipline and Inspection, the rules it operates, how they do the investigations of in anti-corruption cases, and also the evolution of the organizational structure of the CCDI and its relationship with the party committee. So my interest in the elite politics, in particular the party congress, derived from this debate or the assertion regarding the 2018 constitutional amendment, where Xi Jinping lifted the term limit for the PRC chairman, and people started to say, especially in the media, that it's the lifting of the PRC chairmanship in the PRC constitution enabled him to stay in power for the third term and even beyond. Because as someone who has been studying the CCP charter for quite a while, I'm fully, my understanding is there's no such term limit from the perspective of the institutional operation of the party. And the PRC constitution, the term limit that people are talking about is about the PRC, the state office. So that's started that pushed me to look into these succession norms in the party system. And when you look at the succession norms in the party, you have to look at the factional politics. And that requires a significant amount of knowledge about this factional lineage of all the top party members. And I don't have that knowledge ready, and I do not want to and cannot invest this amount of time to relearn or to start to learn this amount of knowledge about people's biographies and who they're linked to whom, and which can be traced back to the Long March era back in the 1920s. So that requires a lot of time and energy to familiarize oneself to this amount of information. So my focus is mainly limited to the more recent development, and at the very top level, their not factional background. I'm looking at one particular norm that people or China analysts generally agree that the CCP has been following, which is an age limit norm. So that's something I have been focusing on to calculate the age of all the members who leaving and coming to the top party decision-making bodies, and try to identify whether there's a pattern at all. And when I started to do that, I found there are several issues that have been overlooked or not discussed in the communities of elite politics scholars. For example, when we say age limit norm, generally people referring to 七上八下. So when you are over the age of 68, you have to leave. When you are under that age, even if you're already 67, you can still stay. So that's a common understanding of the age limit norm. However, there's one issue that is very important but not discussed in any of those literature, which is when you start to count people's age, when is the end point, right? We know the starting point, the birth date. So which day do you count as an end date? Is it the beginning of the year of the Congress, or the beginning of the month of the Congress where it was held, or the date, the actual day when the Congress was held? It makes a lot of difference, right? And I couldn't find nowhere this question was addressed, let alone answered. So I have to experiment different calculating method and to see which one fits a pattern best. So that's one thing I found very interestingly missing because people who study elite politics have been observing or studying the age limit norm for a long time. I was very curious how come this important question was not even addressed. And then when I go further into the age limit norm, I found something else as well that has been overlooked in current studies, which is the current definition is one layer. So 七上八下, it didn't distinguish the membership of people they're looking at who come from different level of decision-making bodies. For example, the current study treat the norm, the age limit norm, regulating the Politburo and Politburo Standing Committee as the same. However, there are some subtle differences. For example, I found that for Politburo Standing Committee members, because they are the highest ranking decision-making body in the party, right? So there's nowhere higher for them to go. There's no other regulatory body who have the proper rank to regulate their exit from that decision-making body. So they have assumed a kind of prerogative to stay unless they have exceeded the age limit. So everyone can stay unless you are 68 or beyond that at the time of the election. And another reason that can get someone out is obviously the disciplinary actions, which has so far not been applied to a sitting Politburo Standing Committee member. So that's a prerogative for a PSC, Politburo Standing Committee member. However, it's not a prerogative for Politburo member because they are lower ranking membership, right? The Politburo is one rank lower than the Politburo Standing Committee. So they don't have a prerogative to stay even if they are under the age limit. They have to go into a competition with new members that may be promoted from the Central Committee. Although the Politburo members, the sitting ones, if they are age eligible, they have a clear advantage in the competition with the new members from the Central Committee, but that does not guarantee that they will continue to stay, even if they are under the age limit. And I found such cases where an age-eligible sitting Politburo member did not get to stay for the next party congress in Jiang Zemin's time, in Hu Jintao's time, and also in Xi Jinping's second term. So people usually attribute this violation of age limit norm to Xi Jinping, forgetting there are similar practices already in Jiang Zemin and Hu Jintao's times, and thinking for all Politburo member and Politburo Standing Committee member, they have the same kind of prerogative and they can stay as long as they're age eligible. So these are certain deficiencies or the lack of conceptual clarity in the current understanding of the age limit norm. And it's also something I was watching before the Congress, because this practice has started basically 20 years ago. But it can be extended 5 years earlier because the age limit norm, the age is not fixed. For example, in Jiang Zemin's time in 1997, it's 70 is a limit, and then it was brought down to 68. So it's only 20 or 25 years lifetime in operation. It's not written in any form of party rules, so it's still kind of vulnerable. So that's what I want to see, whether the norm is continuously observed by by Xi Jinping at this critical party congress. And here's what I found from the party's congress. First of all, the third term of Xi Jinping as a party general secretary, that's not surprising at all, probably for anyone. Because one, as I said, there's no term limit on that office. And secondly, Xi Jinping has already signaled his intent to stay on when he amended the PRC constitution. That's not a condition for him to stay on, but that's a clear signal that he wants to stay on. That is because the party has this Trinitarian doctrine, which vests the power in three major offices or regulatory systems in the hand of one person: the party system as the head of the party, the head of the military, and the head of the state. So previously, before 2018, the PRC constitution does have a two-term limit on the head of the state, the PRC chairman, and the Trinity doctrine will be problematic, will not be continued only if Xi Jinping wants to stay on for a third term as the head of the party, right? Because if he leaves that office and then we have a new party secretary who will be the new head of the state, and you can still have the Trinity without violating the term limit. So for me, that's a clear signal that he wants to stay on and he can stay on. There's no normative constraint to stop him from doing so. So that's not a surprise. What became a surprise and actually quite shocking is what he did with PSC, the Politburo Standing Committee. So what he did is he had not only introduced 4 new members who have clear factional affiliation with himself, but also expelled 2 age-eligible sitting Politburo Standing Committee members out of the PSC, Li Keqiang and Wang Yang. So according to the current age limit norm, anyone who are beyond 68 will leave. So we have Li Zhanshu and Han Zheng who did leave, and both Li Keqiang and Wang Yang were at the age of 67 at the time of election. So they should, because they have the prerogative, so they should be allowed to stay. However, they didn't get to stay. They were pushed out.
Ostrzegam cię, to jest kolejny raz, jak mnie nie słuchasz, więc mówię ci, ta lalka po prostu ja mogę oddać, bo zrobimy ją na internecie.
Please, whoever that is. Sorry.
Okay, that happens. Okay, so where were I? Li Keqiang and Wang Yang, according to the current age limit norm, they should be allowed to stay, but they didn't. This is very interesting because Xi Jinping had an alternative to allow 4 of his own men to come into the PSC, if that's the goal, okay? That means he needs 4 vacancies, right? And if you follow the age limit norm, you would have only 2 vacancies. So in order to have 2 additional vacancies, there's an alternative, which is to enlarge the Politburo Standing Committee. And that alternative is much easier to be achieved because there's no fixed size of the Politburo Standing Committee, right? It's not written down anywhere about the size. And the the last time the size of the PSC had changed is only 10 years ago when Xi Jinping assumed office in 2012. Before 2012, there was 9 seats. And when he assumed office, it was reduced to 7. And so he can easily restore the 9-seat model so that he can keep Li Keqiang and Wang Yang and still bring 4 of his men to the PSC. So that's obviously more accommodating, less antagonistic or irritating to other faction and other top leaders of the party, and much easier to achieve. And he didn't do that. It's not that he's not aware of this option, because he just resized the Politburo from 25 seats to 24. So obviously he's fully aware of the option to resize or to do the court packing to the Politburo Standing Committee, but he didn't. So that for me shows a lack of tolerance of power sharing at the very top of the party decision-making structure. That's one observation that I had. And another observation I want to mention is, because before the Congress, I pointed out the issue about the possibility of the reactivation of the party chairmanship. Because that's the highest title one can strive for as a leader of the party, and that position, taking experience or practices from the past party, from the party history, will give Xi Jinping more security, more commanding power, and more prestige, which seems to be what he's striving for. However, when the party constitution amendment was released, there's no reference, no discussion about the party chairmanship at all. And there's no further shortening of the Xi Jinping thought of the Chinese socialism of socialism with Chinese characteristics in the new era, his own ideology. So before the Congress, everyone was talking about whether it is a time occasion where we will have Xi Jinping thought, a more crispy one for individual, for ideology named after an individual party leader. And there's no doing of that. In addition, there's no 两个确立, but there's also 两个维护. So I wouldn't argue it seems a minor semantic issue. But the mere fact there's no talking about CCP chairmanship and there's no Xi Jinping thought written into the party charter, which also speaks something to me, because he obviously aware of the party chairmanship as something that's more appealing to him from his vantage point, and he just took all the new Politburo Standing Committee member to Yan'an after the Congress immediately, right? That's where the party chairmanship was born. So he's fully aware of that choice, and I do think if he or someone, I'm he wouldn't be the one who made the proposal to the party congress for discussion and deliberation. It has to come from somewhere else. And judging from the level of groveling and pledging loyalty, the enthusiasm, the zealousness of that kind of activities before the Congress, I'm sure someone from the party would have made the proposal that it is a time for we to have the party chairman again. And if such a proposal is made, and I believe with this amount of commanding power that he had by pushing out Li Keqiang and Wang Yang against the age limit norm, he would have that proposal passed at the party meeting. Because for anyone to oppose that proposal, it would be a clear sign of anti-Xi Jinping, right? Because the proposal will wholly be about Xi Jinping and his elevation of power. If you're opposing that, obviously, first of all, you have to give a reason, right? And then when you have to rationalize your opposition to that decision, that means it's not an accidental mistake. You have thought about it and you decided Xi Jinping shouldn't be shouldn't assume higher power in the party. So this will draw a big mark on your back as a target for the next anti-corruption campaign, right? Now political loyalty has a paramount importance in the party and in the anti-corruption investigations. So I don't think anyone would be stupid enough to do that. And if they hadn't, if there's any opposition still left in the party, if they want to put up a fight, they have to fight on personnel matters to keep Li Keqiang or Wang Yang or one of them or both of them in the Politburo Standing Committee, because without them, the elders, they have no mandate to participate in party decision-making at all. Their only mandate is to be a member of the steering committee at the party congress. So that's their battlefield. If they didn't even put up a battle there, it's I don't think anyone would be courageous or powerful, potent enough to put up opposition against the reactivation of party chairmanship if such a proposal is made. So my speculation about what has happened and what has not happened is that Xi Jinping, unlike how the media has portrayed him, he's very skilled in playing the political game in the party, but also he's also disciplined. He's not as power hungry as the media has portrayed him, like he's grabbing power wherever he can put his hands on. But here we see someone who has an opportunity, a realistic opportunity to elevate himself to a higher level of position, and he exercised considerable self-constraint and not doing that. We can speculate and argue, debate about what is the motivation behind it, but that at least shows me that he's consolidating power, not just for vanity or for the sake of vanity or for self-prestige, for self-glorification. It seems he's obtaining power for some political project which he can only achieve or finish with the amount of power that he has trying to accumulate for himself. So I will just stop here, and I welcome any questions or critique.
Great. Thank you very much. I think that really masterful review of the rules and how the rules have been manipulated and not manipulated in this current round suggests first everyone in the audience really should read your two pieces in The Diplomat that have come out recently, which explain all of this as well. But also, I think it means that we need to think again about assumptions that are often at the ready around Xi Jinping, but also around, for lack of a better term, authoritarian politics or factional politics more broadly. And I think what some of your comments underscore is that Xi Jinping at heart is actually an institutionalist. He wants to build the institution, and he wants to build both the institution in the sense of the institution as party, the party as a social fact, but also the institutions in the sense of norms and rules. He actually wants to build them up. And so violations or degradations or denigrations of rules are deliberate and measured. And so in that context, I think it behooves all of us to think about just what does it mean that specifically Wang Yang and Li Keqiang, notably the Prime Minister, and the supposed top economic expert on the Politburo Standing Committee were removed and not allowed to remain on, even though they were under the sort of informally agreed upon age limit. I'm not sure exactly what it means, but I think it is interesting in the context of a 7-member standing committee that 4 members seems to be the magic number of who should be there, right? And of course, Zhao Lezi and Wang Huning are not likely to cause any trouble for Xi Jinping either. Certainly, probably less than Li Keqiang or Wang Yang might have potentially, right? So now there are 5 members of the standing committee, counting Xi Jinping himself, who are very clearly of that one faction, plus 2 others who are very unlikely to pose any kind of challenge. So that's an interesting way to kind of master the game without bending the rules too much. And the other thing is the way in which the rules have been bent basically just suggests that what we're seeing is the end of lifetime tenure or lifetime tenure through to the retiring age on the standing committee of the Politburo. And that is a significant shift, but it's not as significant as if he resized it radically or made it revived the chairman role or something like this. And I think it fits with sort of the other significant pieces of the party Congress that I'll talk just a bit about before we turn the floor over to questions. Right? If we think about kind of substantive policy changes or new directions, we didn't actually see that much. What I thought was interesting is that we saw lots and lots of mentions of 2 concepts: persistence and security. Right? If you look at the text of both the work report and Xi Jinping's opening speech, the words 坚持 and 安全 are repeated again and again and again and again. And very little else is repeated as often or with as much emphasis. And of course, in all of the talk around COVID and the zero COVID strategy, these concepts have been front and center now for over a year. And I think what it suggests is exactly what it says, that there will be a continuation of a sort of security emphasis, sort of safety first and continue in that direction. That's not very exciting, but it does suggest that all of the performance-based legitimacy of sort of delivering economic growth, delivering rising living standards, eliminating poverty, achieving the basically prosperous society, or however we want to translate 小康社会, all of that's taking a sort of backseat role to some extent to the service of continuing stability maintenance and prioritization of security. Right? So that's one aspect of it that's interesting, not really exciting or a big shift. What is, I think, a bigger shift is what was absent from a lot of the discussion. And there are 2 things that have been repeated again and again and again and again for many years now that were not stressed or repeated in the party Congress. One belt, one road, right? If we look at how many times is 一带一路 mentioned anywhere in this, very little. The same with common prosperity, right? 共同富裕 hardly comes up in the party Congress documents or statements. That to me was a big surprise on both fronts relative to other things, because it suggests that those things too will be deprioritized, at least to some degree. Now, it's been suggested by some others that they might actually just be repackaged. That, you know, when you have a headline program, it draws attention to it as a headline program that maybe for whatever reason, the party leadership no longer wants for these specific things. So they might continue with some of the investment programs of One Belt, One Road, or some of the other kind of economic reforms in the service of egalitarianism in support of common prosperity. But it's not obvious that they'll continue to do that. And in fact, it looks fairly clear to me that those programs will be less emphasized looking ahead than they have been in the recent past. And then, of course, the other big thing that happened, and it'd be very interesting to speculate about why this might be, and I've heard many things, and I've speculated myself as well, was the curious exit of Hu Jintao from the closing ceremony. Why then? Why at that moment? Why that way? I mean, I've seen the sort of blown up images of what's in that dossier that was in front of him, and apparently it's still hard for me to read, even when it's blown up. You can see only little bits of it. But those who've looked more carefully than I've been able to say that it's the list of the Politburo members, the 24 elected members. And it does look in some of the footages that there's a back and forth discussion of that. It could be that that was changed in some way, or that somebody was left off. I can guess as to who it would be that Hu Jintao would not want left off, who was left off. It could be that something changed from the last time he'd seen it, but I don't think it was planned. I mean, what I would say pretty emphatically is this was not a pre-planned or choreographed exit. Right? This was not something where Xi Jinping thought in advance, oh, let's remove Hu Jintao on international television. It's actually a big loss of face as I read it for Xi Jinping as well as for Hu Jintao. And the empty chair pictured even on domestic television reports later that made no mention of the exit is embarrassing. People will see that, people have seen it, it's quite embarrassing. So I think, where does this leave us in sort of big picture terms looking ahead? I've been arguing with a bunch of people recently about whether this is in fact a change in the direction of travel. And I don't think it is. And I think Professor Li's comments actually support that idea in a certain way. And the reason I don't think it's a change in direction of travel, what I mean by that is that if we think about cycles of opening and closing, tightening and loosening, right? When in the 1980s, they used to always talk about this, right? The Fang and Shou cycles, right? And so basically we have opening up and loosening cycles from the 11th and 12th Party Congresses in 1977 and 1982. 1987 at the 13th, we see tightening, right? And then we see the 14th, 15th, and 16th Party Congresses in 1992, 97, and 2002 all are about more opening and loosening. But then we've seen tightening at the 17th, 18th, 19th, and now 20th Party Congress. Just progressive tightening of policy or movement in a more conservative direction rather than a more liberal or inclusive direction. And so all of the institutionalist reforms are of a piece with that, especially in the way that they are conservative. They're not just tightening, they're not just authoritarian, they're not just grabbing power, but they're conservative with a small c in the sense that they're not challenging the basic order of how the party operates. In fact, they're reinforcing it. They're trying to, if anything, steer the party back to a more rules-based internal governance system, which it had prized and continues to prize for a long time now. So in that sense, I would just emphasize again, I don't think that this was a major shift in direction, but rather just more of a continuation along the trajectory that is right now quite well established. So I'll stop there, and then we can begin with some questions if that is now on the floor, or if Professor Li would like to respond to anything that it says she can do so, and then we can open.
Okay, well, we're waiting for the questions. I just want to make 2 points as a response to Professor Hurst's comments. One is, I like how you characterized Xi Jinping's character. You mentioned when he made violations, when he bended the rules, it was deliberate. I think that's very important. So we see 4 instances of violations of the current age limit norm. 2 instances involve Li Keqiang and Wang Yang's premature exit, and but the party has already started to make an effort to salvage this violation, because in the official account issued by the party after the Congress, it was described that their premature exit was because their own self-sacrificing voluntary decision to retire earlier so as to make space for the newcomers to come in. So it's an effort to salvage that. So I would call it soft violations, but there are also two hard violations, which involves the stay of Zhang Youxia at the age of 72 for another term at the Politburo, and the promotion of Wang Yi, current Minister of Foreign Affairs, to promote it to the Politburo at the age of 69. And those two violations can be justified by the heightened security concern, as Professor Hurst just mentioned, because one is involved in military, one is foreign relations. So and for all the other instances at the Politburo and above, there are 40 instances of goings and comings, and all the rest have observed the age limit norm. And 95% of the cases involve central committee level entrance and exit have observed the age limit norm. So at a very large extent, the age limit norm was observed, and when he has to violate it, it was for deliberate decision and for specific reasons. So that's one thing I want to point out. And the other thing is about on the policy front. I see. I don't know whether you guys have been following the current affairs in China and the G20 in Bali. I found it quite striking, the difference, the pivoting by Xi Jinping before the G20, all the dialogues, all the talks. I know it's a rhetoric. It cannot be taken at the face value entirely, but at least in rhetoric terms, it's full of hostility and even revocative. But at the G20, the tone has softened so demonstratively, and it's re-escalatory, it's reconciliatory, and I see a change in the tone, at least in those talks, in the readout of the opening remarks with Biden meeting, and even the photo op, the handshake, smiling face, and all that. So that's a sharp change. It seems after Congress, it seems they have made a decision. We wait until the party Congress has finished and do something new or change the policy then, if it will lead to a policy change. And also the COVID policy, although it has not entirely changed back to normal, it couldn't be, right? From zero COVID policy for 3 years, you cannot change to something like we have in Europe overnight. But at least it started to loosen. It shows, because previously my concern is they're not going to lift the zero COVID policy ever because of the benefit for political surveillance and political security purposes. At least now it seems the government is ready to lift it when the other disease control conditions are mature enough to contain the damages and consequences. And it seems there's no saying that we're never going to do that, to lift the policy at all. So it seems to me the party Congress is like a milestone because there's so much stake involved in the party Congress. Imagine if he was challenged or faced serious challenge and somehow the election didn't go his way. He has to wait, and I don't think he will be able to gather enough power for a comeback, because when someone else has the supreme power of the party, the power will shift. It's very difficult for someone who has lost power to come back. So that sets a very important time frame for Xi Jinping's political project, and this is only the beginning of his political project, and I think we're going to see more development in the years to come.
Thank you. I only see one question in the chat from Professor Thornton. He's a professor at the University of Oxford, actually. So I'll start with that. Would you like to read it out, or should I read it for you?
I certainly don't mind if you read it out for me. Thank you so much, James.
Okay,
Go ahead.
all right, so the question is, I'm curious to know whether you think that this represents the end of the model of collective leadership. If so, is that in and of itself not a change of direction, at least from the pattern set in the post-Mao era? So I suppose that's in reference to the comments of Professor Hurst a bit earlier about whether this represents a change or whether it's just simply a milestone.
Well, to me, I don't think it represents a change in and of itself. I think that it's still part of the same overall arc of change that started in 2007, that we saw sort of this general tilt towards something very different than what had been happening between 1992 and 2007. And in a sense, we're kind of back to the late 1980s. In terms of the overall political climate and direction. Obviously not in an exactly equivalent or analogous form, because we're 35 years in the future from then, but in terms of the sort of basic direction and trajectory. What I think is a really interesting thing to consider is why? Why do all of this? What is the purpose? And I think I would agree that what we're likely to see here is a significant new initiative in some way. The question to me is what? I mean, on zero COVID, I agree completely that the government is not going to lift zero COVID very soon, or even within, say, the next probably year. And the reason I would say that is because I don't think there's any political incentive to lift it before the two meetings are done in March, right? And even after the two meetings, they may look to lift it, but it will be very difficult to do that when the cases go up a great deal. As they've already lifted just tiny little pieces of restrictions recently, cases have gone way up. I think there's very rapidly intensifying pressure to crack back down on that. And that's probably coming quite soon. It already is beginning to happen in some cities. Of new lockdowns and so on. So I think it will be very difficult, just feasibly as well as politically, for the CCP or the government to lift zero COVID meaningfully for at least probably about a year after March. Beyond that, I have no idea, because I can't predict how much cases will go up or not. But aside from zero COVID and its utility for social control and necessity for sort of saving face, for the party in the context of the way it's climbed up this ladder of trying to say that the virus is being eliminated, and then only the CCP can save people from the virus. Aside from that, I do see some credibility in this idea that a big project is underway, and something is really going to shift, but I just don't know what. And I think it may be true that we're only seeing the beginning of Xi Jinping's political project, but what is the end? What's the goal? And that's something I'm really not sure. I'd be curious to hear Professor Li's remarks on that, or anyone else who really thinks that if you think there's a way that that we can specify sort of where this is going, if we can get a clear handle on sort of what the goal might be.
I share the same confusion, have the cluelessness about where it's going to go, because there are so many variables that we cannot see and have no information of. It's very difficult to predict. But to answer Professor Thornton's question, does it represent the end of the model of collective leadership, at least at the Politburo Standing Committee level? Largely no, because collective leadership for the party, in my understanding, means all the decision-making bodies, all decision-making power rests primarily in the collective committee, either the standing committee of the Politburo or the Politburo. It's not in the individual office of any party member. So for all the decisions that are issued by the party, regardless whether it's a directive or it's regulation or rules, whatever they are called, it's issued under the name of central committee or whatever level party committee. It's rarely through individual party members, but they do make remarks, 批示 or 指示 on specific matters, which will be sent down to a lower level for implementation. But the universal rules are always made under the name of the party. So in that sense, this collective decision-making will remain. But what Xi Jinping has done with the current congressional reshuffling is he changed the power dynamics in the Politburo Standing Committee, right? So now he has more people whose loyalty he can easily command, but that's he spent so much effort to achieve that goal is because the way the party changes power is the outgoing party leader gets the control of choosing who will be coming in, succeeding the power in the Politburo Standing Committee. So for any newly incoming party leader, the successor, they will have to inherit a Politburo Standing Committee, which are decided by someone else. So at least for the first term, this party leader, as what Xi Jinping had for his first term, he doesn't have a full compliant Politburo committee member, Politburo Standing Committee member to work with. And usually at the second time, you're already going to leave according to the previous practice. So you don't have enough time to pull out a policy that you really liked and implement it by people who you truly trust. So he has broken that barrier or hurdle and now has a fully compliant Politburo Standing Committee. That's why we all assume he has something bigger that he wants to do with the new power structure or power dynamics he now controls at the top of the party. But for the future successors, they will face the same problem, and it depends on their own power of agency, whether they can overcome this barrier, this hurdle, to do what Xi Jinping has done. That's not a guarantee because different leaders obviously have different power of agency. Hu Jintao didn't have what Xi Jinping had. That's how we see differences between leadership styles and different outcomes.
Thank you. We're going to have to definitely wrap up at past, but I think we have time for one more question. So I'll give that to Vicky. Vicky, would you like to ask it?
All right, thank you so much. So I'm also a member at CUCF, and I was wondering, and thank you so much for the excellent talk. So I would like to ask specifically on the female participation in higher CCP politics, as we have seen this year. So like none of the standing committee members at the Politburo are like female members, while in before, as we can see in Jiang Zemin's time, we did have like deputy prime ministers of the country who's female, like we, and also and also the stress of like 妇女能撑半边天 in like the Communist Party discourse like for so many decades. So maybe that would be a minor issue like compared to like Xi Jinping's overreaching power as we can see today. But I also want to ask, so how would you anticipate maybe the future of female participation in like Chinese politics? And especially like with the light on this new legislation passed by Ren Da, like just earlier, like weeks ago, that really redefines Chinese women's rights within the country. So I wonder what are your comments and thoughts on it? Thank you so much.
I don't think I will see a female party general secretary in my lifetime. There's the pool of female high-ranking cadres is considerably smaller than the male pool for all those high-ranking jobs. Usually at each level of party committee, for example, at the provincial level, you will have 13 to 14 members, and it would be lucky to have one female member among that 14 to 13 member party committee. So when it goes to the Politburo level, there will be less and less female candidates who are eligible for that competition. So it's not surprising at all that the Politburo and Politburo Standing Committee has no representation from female candidates. But I think the women's rights battle or struggle in China at this point of time is not so much about whether we will have a female politician elected to the top decision-making body of the party. The battle is about the Tilianyu story and the human trafficking and the domestic violences and the female having a really difficulty time to get divorced, even with evidence of domestic violence in China's courts. And all those areas, I think, are currently the most worthy focus for female women's rights struggle or activities in China. The politicians, female party leader or premier or head of the state right now, probably for most female in China, is too luxury to strive for, at least for now.
Thank you. Thank you both to Professor Hurst and Dr. Li for this fascinating and insightful discussion. I think we're going to probably have to wrap it up now. Professor Hurst, would you like to say a few words just to finish?
No, I was just going to say in response to the question, I agree with everything that Professor Li has just said, in the sense that there are sort of bigger fish to fry, or at least more urgent ones, when it comes to issues of women's rights and gender equality in Chinese society than who's represented at the very top. But I also do think it's striking that organs of state power and party authority that had significant representation of women no longer do, right? That there has been a kind of retrograde motion. And while it's true that, yes, the pool is much smaller, that pool is growing, right? The pool of sort of top level eligible female cadres and officials, right? That there are more than there used to be. So it should be easier to have more. And so in that context, having fewer or zero, as in this case, is that much more striking. And I think that much more problematic. But I think it also speaks to a more general sense of this is not a moment in which the party or its leadership is interested in progressive change, sort of writ large, not just in the sense of including women, but across the board. It's really a time of very conservative, again, in a small c sense, consolidation of power and consolidation of lines of control and authority rather than inclusion or expansion in a progressive way.
Thank you. Sorry for cutting you off there. Yeah, so just going to bring it to an end now. Going to just do a quick plug for our event next week for those based in Cambridge. We have an in-person event with the previous British ambassador to China, Sir Christopher Hum, who's also a previous fellow of Gonville and Keyes, or probably still a fellow. I think that's how it works. And that'll be next Thursday, the 24th at 5:30. So do come along to that. I'd also just like to do a quick plug for our new journal, the Cambridge University China Forum. We've just started a journal called Ripples, the Cambridge China Review. So if you look that up on Google, you should be able to find our first articles, which is exciting. So yeah, thank you all for attending, and hopefully see you next time.